In Sudan, security forces fired tear gas early this morning at thousands of anti-government protesters in Khartoum. They're now demonstrating outside army headquarters for a fourth straight day. These are the latest in a series of protests which started 4 months ago after the price of bread tripled. The protesters are now calling for the resignation of President Omar al-Bashir, who seized power in a coup 30 years ago. Maryam AL-KHAWAJA is a human rights activist and Europe Director for Physicians for Human Rights. She joins me now live on the program. Maryam, your organization has just released a report providing evidence of what it calls the Sudanese government's campaign of intimidation, persecution, torture of peaceful protesters and medical professionals. Tell us a bit more about how you put this report together and what it says.
Well, the report looks at the situation on the ground, but especially because as an organization that works on physicians and medical services or the medical field, when we saw the targeted attack on doctors and physicians in Sudan, but also on medical facilities, we felt that there was a need for us to document what was happening. And so we've been working with sources on the ground at getting information, data, and documentation and analyzing it with our medical experts in the United States so that we can take a look at what's happening exactly. And that's where the report came from.
So what concrete examples have you been able to find about what you describe in the report, these examples of persecution, torture? What's happening exactly?
So what we've been able to document so far was the killing of one doctor, Dr. Babakar, who was actually killed while in the process of treating an injured protester. He had come out of the area where they were treating protesters and was trying to convince the security forces to back off and allow them to treat the injured when he was shot and killed, unfortunately. But we've also documented 7 attacks at least on medical facilities, whether it was with shooting tear gas inside hospital wards, which of course is extremely dangerous and prohibited, but also then the attacking of people who were trying to evacuate from these hospitals after shots were fired inside using tear gas or other types of ammunition. And so that's just part of what we've been looking at. Of course, there's also the numbers of what's been happening. We've looked at, there's been documentation that there's around 60 at least people who have been killed. And these numbers are not what we've been able to verify ourselves, but the numbers that we've been receiving from other organizations as well. And then, of course, we've looked at the arrests of around 136 physicians so far. I'm sure the number is actually higher now since the release of the report. But I think what was interesting about the targeting specifically of physicians is how physicians were singled out and were treated differently according to the people that we spoke to on the ground when they were arrested.
Now, these protests have been escalating since they first became last December, and your report is even more timely with, of course, the new mass protests this week. What do you think that the international community should be doing to help?
So we have very specific recommendations in this report, and I think what we need right now is an adequate international response. We're looking at a situation, as you said, that is escalating, that could potentially get much worse. And so it is extremely critical at this point that there is an international reaction that is adequate to the situation on the ground. And that, I think, will take the form of whether it's member states at the United Nations Human Rights Council reacting to what is happening in Sudan, whether it's with a resolution, statements, and so on. But then also the pressure to put pressure on the Sudanese government to allow monitors, international monitors, and special procedures from the United Nations to actually access the country and be able to monitor and document what is happening on the ground. And so whether it's the Special Rapporteur on Freedom of Assembly and Association, or the Special Rapporteur on Torture, or the Special Rapporteur on Extrajudicial Killings, these mandates are going to be critical in the upcoming period in being able to both monitor and document, and then also report back to the United Nations about what's happening on the ground. And then, of course, separately from the United Nations, it's going to be extremely important that governments around the world react to what's happening in Sudan by having sanctions that target specific individuals who have been responsible or who become identified as being responsible for the crackdown and the violations that have occurred so far.
Maryam AL-KHAWAJA, thank you so much. You're a human rights activist and Europe Director for Physicians for Human Rights.